Welcome back to the third episode, everyone. Thank you for the love and support. Let's dive in. Years later, long after the soft murmur of Grace's laughter had faded from the earth, her name became legend. Her portraits adorned city murals, her story was taught in art schools, and her philosophy, that everyone has a rhythm, inspired therapists, teachers, and performers around the world. But for Hope Lawson, Grace's daughter, the weight of that legacy was both a gift and a burden. The world had changed. Technology ruled everything. Dance wasn't just movement anymore, it was content, choreographed for views, likes, and algorithms. Hope's Academy had expanded into multiple branches, each one successful and filled with bright-eyed children. Yet sometimes, when she stood before a mirror, she wondered if she had lost the raw soul her mother once embodied. One evening, after a long rehearsal, she sat in the old park, the same park where Grace had once danced barefoot for coins. The air smelled of rain and memory. The city lights flickered on the river. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Mom, if you were here, would you still dance for joy or for the world?" The breeze stirred, brushing her cheek, almost like an answer. Just then, she heard laughter, not the polite, rehearsed laughter of gala halls, but the honest giggle of children. Turning, she saw a group of street kids, barefoot and ragged, attempting cartwheels on the grass. One little boy hummed into an old phone speaker, pretending it was a radio. Hope felt her heart twist. She saw herself in them, and her mother most of all. Without thinking, she got up, kicked off her shoes, and walked toward them. "Hey," she said with a warm smile. "Need a dance partner?" The kids froze, staring. One of them, a girl with tangled braids, tilted her head. "You're that dancer from the TV, right?" Hope laughed softly. "Maybe. But today, I'm just Hope." She turned on her phone, played an old melody, the same tune her mother once danced to, and began to move. Not perfectly. Not gracefully. But freely. The children watched, giggled, and then joined in. Soon the park filled with laughter and rhythm, just like decades ago. People stopped, took pictures, filmed the scene, unaware they were witnessing history repeating itself. By the end of the song, Hope was breathless, sweaty, and radiant. The children clapped, and one of them, the little boy with the old phone, said, "Miss, you dance like you're happy." Hope knelt, smiling. "That's because I am. Dancing makes me remember who I am." "Can we come again tomorrow?" he asked. She hesitated, the same hesitation her mother once felt, then smiled. "If the rain doesn't stop us, I'll be here." The next day, she returned, and so did the children. Word spread fast. Soon, local vendors, parents, and passers-by gathered to watch Hope and the Riverside Kids perform every weekend. Within weeks, media outlets began covering it. The daughter of Grace revives her mother's legacy through street dance. But for Hope, it wasn't about fame, it was about rediscovering her roots. Her academy students began volunteering, teaching the children for free. Soon, she turned part of the park into an open-air studio, wooden floors, music speakers, and murals painted by the kids themselves. At the entrance, she placed a plaque that read, "Dedicated to Grace, who taught the world that love can dance." Months later, Hope received an unexpected visitor, a tall woman in her late 30s, walking with the aid of a crutch. Her eyes were kind, her smile trembling. "You might not remember me," the woman said softly, "but I remember your mother. I was one of the hospital kids she used to visit with Miss Ada." Hope's heart fluttered. "Of course. You're Clara, right?" The woman nodded, tears glistening. "Your mother taught me how to move my hands again. She said, even if your body can dance, your heart still can. I became a therapist because of her." Hope smiled warmly. "She'd be proud of you." Clara handed her a small envelope. Inside was a faded photo, Grace sitting on the grass, smiling with children all around her. Hope's throat tightened. "She gave me this the day I left the hospital," Clara said. "Said to return it when I was ready to pass it on." Hope traced her mother's face in the photo, whispering, "You never stopped teaching, did you?" That evening, Hope gathered the children around a small bonfire by the river. She showed them the photo. "This woman," she said softly, "was once like you, someone who danced even when life was hard. Everything you see here, the music, the laughter, this park, exists because she believed joy could heal." The children listened quietly. One of them asked, "Was she your teacher?" Hope smiled through her tears. "She was my mother. And now, she's yours too." Over time, the Riverside Project became known as Grace Park, a place where anyone could come and dance freely, no matter their age, wealth, or ability. Every Sunday, families gathered with drums, violins, radios, and flutes. Hope danced with everyone, toddlers, elders, even people in wheelchairs. The city that once overlooked Grace now celebrated her. Statues were built, scholarships named, songs composed. Yet what touched Hope most was not the fame, it was the laughter that returned to the park every morning, the same way it had decades ago. One day, during a press interview, a journalist asked Hope, "What's the secret behind the academy's success?" Hope thought for a moment, then smiled. "It's simple," she said. "We don't teach people how to dance. We remind them that they already can." Years later, when Hope grew old and gray, her daughter, another little Grace, began dancing by the same river, under the same golden light. The cycle had begun anew. As the sun dipped into the horizon, Hope watched her from a bench, whispering the same words her mother once spoke. "Someday, little one, the world will stop long enough to watch you dance. And when it does, dance not for them, but for the joy that lives inside you." The breeze carried her words away, across the water, through the trees, into the hearts of those who still believed. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the city, it almost felt like the spirit of Grace was still there, laughing, dancing, and reminding the world that even in its darkest hours, hope always finds its rhythm. Decades passed, and time, as it always does, reshaped everything. Buildings rose where the old park once stood, the city grew louder, faster, brighter. Yet through all the changes, one place remained sacred, Grace Park. Children still danced barefoot under the trees. Musicians still played the same melody that had once echoed through the park when the first Grace danced for a lonely child in a wheelchair. And at the heart of it all stood a towering bronze statue, a woman with flowing hair, arms lifted toward the sky, her scarf frozen mid-spin. At her feet, carved in marble, were the words. She danced not for the world to see her, but for the world to remember how to feel. The statue was surrounded by fresh flowers every morning. No one knew who placed them there, though those who looked closely would often spot an elderly woman in a soft shawl, watching quietly from a distance. That woman was Hope Lawson, now in her 80s, with snow-white hair and eyes that still held the shimmer of movement. Every year on the anniversary of the Academy's founding, she came to sit beneath the statue, watching the children rehearse. The park had changed, drone cameras hovered above, broadcasting the event live, music pulsed from wireless speakers, dancers wore bright, modern costumes with LED ribbons. Yet, to Hope, it still felt like home. That day, she wasn't alone. A young girl sat beside her, no older than 10, wearing a silver dress that glowed faintly in the sunlight. Her curly hair bounced as she turned to her grandmother. "Grandma," she whispered, "is it true the lady in the statue was your mom?" Hope smiled softly. "Yes, little one. That's Grace, the woman you were named after." The girl's eyes widened. "She was a dancer, right?" "She was more than that," Hope said gently. "She was a light in a dark time. She showed people that movement could heal even the deepest wounds. That laughter and rhythm could save lives." The girl tilted her head. "Like how your classes help the hospital kids." Hope nodded. Exactly like that. She started it all, with nothing but a broken radio and a dream. Little Grace thought for a moment. Grandma, she asked again. Do you think people can still dance like she did? Without all the cameras and lights? Hope looked toward the river, where the golden reflections shimmered across the surface. Maybe, she whispered. If they remember why they started. Later that evening, as twilight wrapped the park in its soft purple veil, the crowd began to gather. It was time for the Grace Festival, a celebration that had become an annual event across the nation. On stage, little Grace stood nervously, clutching her scarf, the same old scarf her grandmother had preserved all these years, once belonging to the original Grace. The fabric was frayed, its color faded, but it carried history like perfume. Hope stood backstage, watching. Her heart swelled as the music began, a re-recording of the original song that had once played on her mother's rusty radio. And then, the little girl danced. Not with polished perfection, not with technical precision, but with the same wild, unfiltered joy her great-grandmother once had. Her feet skipped across the stage, her arms spun freely, and for a moment, everyone watching forgot the world beyond the park. When the performance ended, the audience rose in thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, banners waved, and the city's skyline glowed behind them like a curtain of stars. Hope walked slowly onto the stage, her steps soft but steady. The crowd fell silent as she took the microphone. Her voice trembled, old but strong. When my mother danced, she began, she had no music but her heart, no stage but the earth, no audience but a child who needed to smile. That single moment, that act of kindness, started everything you see today. She paused, glancing at the statue glowing in the background. Grace taught us that you don't need perfection to create beauty. You just need courage. You need to believe that your movement, your small, trembling, imperfect movement, can touch someone's soul. Her voice softened further. My mother danced so others could feel alive. I taught so others could heal. And now, this next generation, she looked lovingly at her granddaughter, will dance so the world never forgets what love looks like in motion. The crowd erupted in applause again, some weeping openly. That night, under the bright festival lights, fireworks blossomed above the park. The reflection danced on the river, blending with the golden statue's bronze shimmer, as if Grace herself were twirling once more beneath the heavens. As the years continued to turn, Hope eventually passed on, peacefully, in her sleep, like her mother before her. The city declared a week of mourning. Flags were lowered, and schools taught lessons about the women who danced for hope. Little Grace, now grown into a confident young woman, became the director of the Grace Foundation for Art and Healing, an international organization that built schools, hospitals, and open-air studios in over 30 countries. She traveled the world, bringing the rhythm of compassion to refugee camps, war-torn villages, and busy cities alike. Children learned to express trauma through dance, to communicate through movement when words failed them. One day, while visiting a rural town in Kenya, she found herself performing for a group of children beneath a mango tree. The scene felt familiar: laughter, clapping, bare feet, sunlight through leaves. As she twirled, she felt something warm brush her heart, a whisper, like a melody only she could hear. "Dance, my child," the voice said softly, "for love, for life, for tomorrow." She smiled, closing her eyes, and let the rhythm take over. Years later, back home, Grace stood by the river at dusk, the same river where it had all begun generations ago. The city skyline reflected across the water, and behind her, the academy gleamed with glass walls and open studios. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, weathered object, her great-grandmother's radio. It no longer worked, but when she turned the knob, the faint sound of static whispered through the speaker, like a heartbeat. Tears filled her eyes. "We are still dancing, Grandma," she whispered. "Your music never stopped." The wind picked up, swirling around her. For a moment, She thought she saw 3 figures dancing in the fading light, one barefoot and glowing, one graceful and serene, and one laughing like a child. Her mother. Her grandmother. Herself. The generations moved together, past, present, and future, in a single timeless rhythm. And as the stars blinked awake above the city, the world seemed to pause, listening to the eternal truth that had begun with a lonely dancer in a park long ago. Hope is the dance that never ends. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet the memory of that unexpected reunion lingered in his mind like the echo of a song he couldn't forget. He would replay that phone call over and over, her trembling voice, her tears over the phone, and the strange mixture of pain and love that colored every word she spoke. He had achieved everything the world told him was success: the luxury penthouse, the cars, the admiration of strangers, the kind of fame people dream of. But in that moment, hearing his sister's broken voice, he realized how hollow it all felt without the people who once mattered most. He began thinking about their childhood, about how they once shared everything: laughter, secrets, and even pain. They had fought over silly things, like who got the last piece of fried plantain or who held the TV remote, but they always made up within hours. Yet time, pride, and distance had turned small misunderstandings into great wars. When she blocked him, it had hurt, but he had told himself he didn't care. He buried himself in work, in deals, in people who praised him, but deep inside, he missed her. Now, standing by his window overlooking the glittering city, he couldn't ignore the emptiness anymore. The skyline shimmered like a mirage, beautiful but unreachable. The truth hit him like a quiet storm: he wanted reconciliation more than applause. He wanted family more than fortune. That night, he didn't scroll through his stock reports or emails. Instead, he opened an old photo album, digital, dusty, hidden deep in his phone. There they were, 2 kids with messy hair, grinning wide with ice cream on their faces. One photo showed her holding his hand proudly on their first day of school. Another captured them sitting beside their mother, sharing a meal on a broken wooden table but smiling as if they owned the world. Tears blurred his vision. How did they let so much time pass in silence? How could love that strong bend under the weight of pride? He decided then, he would not wait another day. The next morning, before sunrise, he called her again. At first, the line was quiet. Then came her soft voice, weary but warmer than before. They spoke, awkwardly at first, stumbling over memories and apologies, both afraid of saying the wrong thing. But soon, laughter crept in, light and healing. They reminisced about their mother's stories, the neighbors who scolded them, the songs they used to sing. By the time the sun rose, they were no longer strangers bound by past hurt. They were siblings again, fragile, healing, but together. That weekend, she came to visit his penthouse, not as a curious outsider from TikTok, but as his sister. When she entered, she didn't stare at the marble floors or the shimmering chandeliers. Instead, she looked straight at him, eyes wet, and whispered, "I missed you." He smiled, a real, unguarded smile, the kind he hadn't felt in years. He hugged her, and in that embrace, all the lost years seemed to dissolve. Money could buy luxury, but it could never buy this: forgiveness, connection, belonging. They spent hours talking about life, about mistakes, about how success had pulled them in opposite directions. She told him how she struggled, how pride stopped her from reaching out earlier, how she thought he'd forgotten her. He admitted he'd built walls out of ego, thinking success would fill the void. By the end of the night, they both knew the truth: the richest people are not those who own penthouses, but those who keep love alive despite the distance. From that day, he changed. The man who once measured worth by numbers now measured it by moments. He started donating quietly to causes their mother cared about. He funded schools in their old neighborhood, helped families find shelter, and supported small businesses. But he didn't post it online. He no longer needed validation from strangers. Sometimes, His sister would come by and cook in his lavish kitchen, dishes from their childhood, spicy and imperfect but full of memory. They'd laugh about old times, tease each other like before, and she'd tell him how proud she was, not because of his wealth, but because he found his way back home emotionally, spiritually, and morally. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the city gold, she said softly, "You know, I saw that TikTok video by accident. Maybe it was fate." He chuckled, sipping his tea. "Maybe it was," he said. "Maybe that's how God reconnects people, through unexpected ways." And as the city lights flickered below, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The kind of peace that comes not from having everything, but from knowing you've made things right. Weeks turned into months, and the once occasional calls between the siblings became regular. Every Sunday, no matter how busy his schedule, he would clear his meetings just to hear her voice. They began to rebuild, piece by piece, not by grand gestures but through small acts of understanding. Sometimes they spoke about business, sometimes about old wounds, but more often, they just shared silence, the kind of silence that felt safe, no longer filled with resentment but comfort. She began visiting him more often, and gradually, her laughter returned to the house. The cold, echoing penthouse that once felt like a museum suddenly carried warmth. Her slippers by the door, her laughter bouncing off the marble walls, the smell of homemade stew drifting from the kitchen, these were small signs that his life was becoming human again. For years, he had surrounded himself with art pieces, glass sculptures, and priceless furniture, yet none of it compared to the feeling of hearing his sister hum while washing dishes. One evening, while they sat together looking over the sparkling city, she said, "You know, I always thought you forgot us. That once you made it big, you didn't want to remember where you came from." Her words weren't bitter, they were simply honest. He sighed, staring into his cup. "I thought about you every single day," he admitted. "But I didn't know how to reach out without reopening old wounds. So I convinced myself that silence was peace." She shook her head gently. "Silence isn't peace. It's just distance wearing a disguise." Her words sank deep into him. That night, after she left, he sat alone thinking about all the people he'd lost along the way, friends he hadn't called, cousins he hadn't visited, neighbors who once treated him like their own. Success had given him power, but it had also built invisible walls. And for the first time, he wanted to tear them down. The next morning, he did something spontaneous. He got into his car, no chauffeur, no convoy, and drove to the neighborhood where they had grown up. The streets were narrower than he remembered, the houses smaller, the air thick with the scent of roasted corn and rain. Children ran barefoot, laughing, chasing each other with the same carefree joy he once had. He parked near their old home, now faded, its paint peeling, but still standing like a memory that refused to die. An elderly woman recognized him instantly. "Jerry," she gasped, hand to her chest. "Is that really you?" He smiled, humbled. "Yes, Mama Peace. It's me." She hugged him like a long-lost son. The neighborhood gathered, curious and excited. They had seen him on television, in magazines, walking red carpets, but here, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just Jerry, the boy who used to play football on the dusty streets. He greeted everyone, laughing with children, shaking hands with old friends, listening to their stories. He noticed how some families struggled, cracked roofs, hungry eyes, weary smiles. It broke him. That evening, when he returned to his penthouse, he told his sister what he'd seen. "We can't just move on," he said. "We owe them something." She nodded in agreement. "Not charity," she said softly, "but opportunity." Together, they started the Hope Foundation, named after their late mother. It began small: scholarships for children, renovation of the old community school, healthcare support for single mothers. But soon, it grew. Investors joined in, inspired not by profit but by purpose. The news caught on, and suddenly, the same people who once gossiped about his luxury lifestyle began to talk about his compassion. Yet, amid all the recognition, he stayed grounded. He never forgot what truly changed him, that one phone call from a crying sister who reminded him that love was more valuable than gold. Months later, he and his sister visited their mother's grave together for the first time in years. The cemetery was quiet, the sky soft and grey. He knelt, brushing the leaves from the headstone, whispering, "We finally made it, Mama. But not the way I once dreamed. We made it because we found each other again." His sister placed a small bouquet of lilies beside the grave. "She'd be proud of you," she said gently. He shook his head. "No. She'd be proud of us." They stood in silence, hands clasped, hearts lighter. For the first time in years, the ache between them had turned into gratitude. As they walked back to the car, he noticed a little boy sitting nearby, drawing on the dirt with a stick. The boy looked up shyly and said, "Are you the man who built schools?" He chuckled. "Something like that." The boy smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "I want to go to school, too." He paused, then reached into his pocket, handed the boy a card, and said, "You will." Driving away, he realized life had brought him full circle, from the child who once had nothing, to the man who gave others the chance to dream. That night, as the city lights glittered beneath his penthouse balcony, he no longer saw wealth as a symbol of distance, but as a bridge. A bridge that could connect pain to purpose, loneliness to love, and success to service. His sister joined him outside, a blanket around her shoulders, smiling softly. "Funny, isn't it?" she said. "The same world that divided us brought us back together." He nodded. "Maybe everything we go through is just the road leading us home." As months flowed into years, the Hope Foundation blossomed into something extraordinary. What began as a small neighborhood initiative grew into a citywide movement. Their story spread through news outlets and social media, not just because of wealth or fame, but because of sincerity. People saw the transformation in them, how pain had been turned into purpose, and that inspired others to do the same. Schools were built in forgotten corners of the city. Orphanages that once struggled for food now had proper kitchens and libraries. Women who had lost faith in tomorrow found work, learned skills, and reclaimed their dignity. The foundation became a home for the broken, not built with marble or gold, but with love and empathy. Jerry began visiting these projects himself, no longer content to sign checks from his office. He would walk through the classrooms, kneel beside children learning to write their names, listen to single mothers speak about their challenges. Every visit reminded him that wealth was not measured by what you owned but by how many lives you touched. Grace, his sister, became the heart of it all. Her warmth reached people in ways his money never could. She laughed with children, danced with street vendors, hugged the elderly. Wherever she went, hope seemed to follow. Soon, people began calling her Auntie Grace, the angel of the community. One afternoon, they organized a massive charity gala, the biggest the foundation had ever hosted. The city's elite arrived in shimmering gowns and polished tuxedos, but amid all the glamour stood Grace in a simple white dress, radiant in her humility. When it was her turn to speak, the hall fell silent. She stood before the microphone, her voice trembling at first. "A few years ago," she began, "I was angry, bitter, and broken. I thought my brother had abandoned me. I blamed him for every hardship I faced. But now I understand, pain has a strange way of teaching us what truly matters. It shows us that love, once lost, can still be found if we are willing to forgive." Her words pierced the crowd. Some wiped away tears, others looked thoughtful. Jerry, seated in the front row, felt something rise in his throat, pride, regret, and love all at once. Grace continued softly, "The Hope Foundation isn't just about charity. It's about mending what's been torn apart, families, hearts, dreams. It's about remembering that even in our darkest nights, we can still light a candle for someone else. The applause that followed seemed endless. Cameras flashed, but Jerry didn't care about publicity anymore. He stood and embraced her on stage, whispering, "You saved me more than I ever saved you." Later that night, as the gala ended and guests drifted away, Jerry stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The moon hung low, silvering the horizon. Grace joined him quietly, resting her elbows on the railing. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "All the time," he replied. "But not with regret anymore. Just gratitude, because it brought us here." They fell into a comfortable silence. Below them, the city glimmered with life, neon lights, laughter, traffic, the hum of endless stories being written. Months later, a letter arrived at the foundation's office. It was from a young woman named Amora, who had once been a homeless street performer. Her words were filled with emotion. "Dear Hope Foundation. Years ago, I watched a story online about a woman named Grace who danced in the park to make a little girl laugh. That story changed me. I was in despair then, but watching her taught me that joy is something you can give even when you have nothing. Today, I run a small dance school for underprivileged kids. We call it Steps of Hope. Thank you for reminding me that kindness is contagious." When Grace finished reading the letter, she wept quietly. That moment felt like a circle closing, proof that a single act of compassion could ripple through time, touching lives she would never even meet. Jerry placed a hand on her shoulder. "This," he said softly, "is why we do it." That same week, they traveled to the outskirts of the country to inaugurate a new school built entirely through donations. It was located in a rural village surrounded by lush green fields and dusty roads. The villagers had been waiting since dawn, drumming, dancing, singing songs of joy. As they stepped out of the car, children ran forward holding handmade banners that read, "Welcome, Hope Family." The laughter, the gratitude, the pure joy, it was overwhelming. Grace couldn't stop smiling, tears shimmered in her eyes as she cut the ribbon. After the ceremony, an old man approached Jerry and said, "You have done what even our leaders forgot to do. May your name never fade." Jerry bowed slightly. "It's not my name that matters," he said. "It's the hope we leave behind." That night, they stayed in a small guest house near the school. There was no luxury, just simple walls, the scent of wet earth, and the sound of crickets. As they sat by the oil lamp, Grace looked thoughtful. "You know," she murmured, "I used to believe miracles were rare. But now I think miracles are simply acts of love that refuse to give up." He smiled. "Then we'll keep making miracles, one person at a time." Years later, when people told their story, they didn't speak of riches or penthouses. They spoke of a woman who forgave and a man who learned what love truly means. The foundation expanded internationally, supporting orphanages and community schools across Africa and Asia. But despite the growth, Jerry and Grace remained humble. Every year on the same date, the day she first called him after years of silence, they would meet at the park where it all began. They would sit on a bench, watch children play, and talk about their mother, their dreams, and how far they had come. One evening, as the sun set in golden hues, Grace whispered, "Do you think Mama can see us?" Jerry smiled, his eyes glistening. "I think she never stopped watching." The breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the air, the same scent that had once filled their childhood home. Grace closed her eyes and said softly, "Then we are finally home." They sat there until the stars appeared, hand in hand, no words needed. The city lights twinkled below, not as a symbol of distance anymore, but as a reminder of everything they had healed together. And for the first time, both knew that life's greatest luxury wasn't the penthouse, the fame, or even the success. It was forgiveness, the kind that mends hearts, rebuilds families, and gives broken souls the courage to begin again. This is just the beginning. Thank you for watching this video. Your love and support truly matter.